This is a response to a video by Inmendham a couple of weeks ago, Biology 103. Would have replied earlier, but I had some shit to do. Yeah, so this is...
I mean, you know, what am I supposed to do with this crap? Was I supposed to explain all this in a comment section, you fuckhead? So I just think, again, if anybody, just for future reference, if you're going to say I'm wrong, then I want a fucking quote. So I'm just telling people I'm not going to block this guy, but look, I'm going to react really negative to fuckers saying I'm wrong without quoting me. And you better make sure you quote me accurately, and you better make sure it's in context, because I'm not going to accept some sort of perversion of my quote either. I'm clear about what I say most of the 99.9% of the time, and anybody with a little bit of brains, you know, just a little bit of fairness, is going to get the drift.
Fair enough. But, you know, I think I try to be clear about what I say as well. And I don't know, if you want, you know, they were intended as constructive criticisms. So, you know, I suppose, you know, take it or leave it. So anyway, I'll start at the beginning and see how we get on.
Alright, doing a biology video, I guess I'll just call it like Biology 102 or something. Or 103, let's say. Anyway, this annoying guy, anyway, posted some annoying comments. First, he asked which the video was referenced, and he should have been following these videos. You know, they're all anti-Contavod mostly, and it's an anti-Contavod video the comments on, and so, well, whatever. You should be able to find that yourself, buddy. But anyway, alright, regarding epigenetics at 24-ish, you're wrong and right about this. Well, that's really a dangerous thing to start with, is you're wrong without quoting me. That pisses me off. So fuck you for that. The switching on and off of genes and the passing on of these states to the next generation can be of adaptive significance. Well, that's like a nothing statement. Duh.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But you know, in the video in question, you kind of claim that such a mechanism could only do damage, could only be maladaptive.
Examples include genes involved in resistance to insecticides, phenotype responses to soil quality, etc. Yeah, now you're talking about the more primitive life forms, where...
More primitive life forms. We're talking about evolutionary mechanisms here, right? Whether an organism is primitive or whatever is irrelevant. A good model is going to be one that's generally applicable, or best explains the data. If there are exceptions, you know, maybe in the more advanced life forms, we're still better off making we're still better off working out what's happening in the so-called lowly organisms first, right? So you know, so we can best understand what's going on in the higher life forms, or why the exceptions deviate.
But genetics is a bigger part of their genetic code, in the sense that they need to react to seasonal changes. Obviously, mosquitoes that lay eggs in the spring versus mosquitoes that lay eggs in the fall, they need a different...
If we're specifically talking about states of gene expression being passed on to the next generation, then seasonal creatures like your mosquitoes will have to actively work against this epigenetics, right? So, you know, if different states are needed at different times of the year, then it's no good for a autumn insect to inherit the spring state from its mother.
Kind of prodigy would probably be in the best interest. So yeah, you can find lots of examples where there's recessive qualities that are turned on and off depending on environmental circumstances, but it certainly has nothing to do.
Epigenetics it's not about dominance. Dominance is just the masking effect of one allele over another. Both alleles could be expressed equally at a messenger RNA level or protein level. It's just that the phenotype is indistinguishable from the dominant homozygote.
With ourselves, willing ourselves to have better code, or doing something to improve our code. We can't improve it, we can just turn things on and off. And guess what? That's like turning, it's like saying you got a feature like Wi-Fi on your computer, but the Wi-Fi stresses the CPU a little bit, so there's times where you want to turn the Wi-Fi off. So all you're doing is turning off the improvements, in a way. And this all...
I like the CPU analogy. There's certainly going to be costs involved in, up in the production of some gene products relative to others. Presumably this is why, when the causal agent is removed, and the benefit disappears, the state returns to normal, whatever normal is.
Does relate to recessive and dominant genes, which exist for a reason, which is sometimes positive changes.
No, it doesn't. Epigenetics is about gene regulation. Dominance is about the masking of expression of one allele over another.
Changes that work for this year and next year and the year after that might not be in the long-term interest of your survival. So it's in the genetic code's interest to have mechanisms that protect against going down wrong roads, dead ends. It doesn't want to go down a dead end. Even though it's an improvement in the short run, it doesn't want to hit the dead end of long-term failure. So it wants to have some capacity to keep throwing.
You're confusing the Darwinian or neo-Darwinian mechanism with epigenetics here, I think. But if we're talking about the Darwinian process, then selection, is operating on the here and now, not guessing which genes might be useful in the future. It might look like that, but that's only because the genes that have survived until now have had to deal with and have dealt with such perturbations in the past. The epigenetic process, on the other hand, is not about variation, though it too is responding to the here and now. In the development and physiology of the individual, structure and phenotypic plasticity are created through the differential regulation of identical genetic recipes. But by how the code is handled, rather than how the code varies. Environmental fluctuations or changes will vary how acute or chronic they are. In terms of how natural selection would deal with how organisms respond phenotypically, then I guess the pressure would be for the genome to deal with acute problems with acute solutions, and chronic problems with chronic solutions. If somebody creeps up on you from behind and shouts boo, it makes sense for your body to respond quickly and recover quickly, should the danger be non-existent. If on the other hand your diet or your water is chronically contaminated by some toxin, the effect of which might be ameliorated by increasing the production of some enzyme or other, then it might make sense for that state to be maintained throughout your life. but also it would make sense for that state of high alert to be passed on to your offspring. And though that might sound fanciful, there are a number of well-documented cases of this occurring in nature, demonstrated in well-controlled experiments.
Excellent. So it's a throwback mechanism, and that's what they found with epigenetics in human beings, is that when I said you can only create errors, I probably could have said that better and said that, yeah, what you can do is end up having a gorilla as a child, okay? You can end up throwbacking.
I don't know about the human studies, so I can't comment on them.
Because what they find is that the more stressed the woman is, especially during pregnancy, the more likely your kid's going to be born with a tail. The more likely recessive genes will be turned on, because basically the mechanism is saying, go back to the old thing because this new one might not be working, kind of, in a subtle way. And how it...
Well, I guess stress during pregnancy would count as one of my acute problems. There are going to be a whole variety of reasons why pregnancy goes wrong, not least because of the conflict of interest between mother and offspring.
Exactly, DNA does that, I think, is just through error checking. So the same mechanism a computer has, like your computer's doing this stuff, it's doing it with a bunch of error checking. Alright, so when it writes stuff, when it's doing stuff in the memory locations and everything, it puts the stuff in two different places. And then it checks the two things, and it says, are those two things the same? And that's the way it knows that there isn't a write failure somewhere, or a read failure, because the memory is a little bit funky, and sometimes it screws up. And so if it finds that the two things don't match, it has to choose, how it is going to deal with that circumstance. And the way it might deal with it is it might go back to some other piece that it has also stored, or it might be might have it in three places and just go 2 against 1. So the same kind of error checking exists in our genetic code.
But we're not talking about errors in the code. The code is unchanged. What has changed, or might be changed, is the state of the gene or genes in the code. Some of these states will be adaptive and others maladaptive. We can expect natural selection to punish codes that consistently allow states to drift into the arena of the unwell.
And in doubt, it just says, go back, go back, go back a step. And that's going to be a likely response of the code anyway. So, alright, he's going to do this thing, so I might as well get there. Alright, Lamarck was not entirely wrong. Well, see, that's just a bullshit statement. He was entirely wrong, okay? There's no way to will yourself a longer neck or a bigger penis. It just ain't gonna fucking goddamn happen. You're not gonna be able to will your kid a bigger penis. It just ain't gonna happen. As much as you hope and wish and all that crap, it ain't going to fucking happen. So Lamarck was completely full of shit. And it's just stupid to say he was not entirely wrong. He was entirely wrong.
Both Lamarck and Darwin were trying to explain adaptation. Lamarck's mechanism was the inheritance of acquired characteristics. We now know that this mechanism can't explain complex adaptations, that the information in the code flows only one way, from gene to phenotype. However, the environment does affect the state of the code, and thereby the phenotype acquired. So in this very limited sense, in this very limited context of epigenetics, the offspring are inheriting characteristics acquired by the parent. which is a fact, right? So Lamarck's idea was wrong, but not entirely wrong.
Anyway, in a sense, we already knew this. No, we don't know this. This is another bullshit sentence. After all, liver cells beget liver cells. No biggie. I love that kind of terminology. Anyway, but you are dead right that this is not seen as any challenge to the Darwinian mechanism. Well, of course it is. That's right. So I'm not wrong, you fucker. In the big picture. Well, anyways, let's get to the selfish gene shit. This is where he goes way the fuck off for us. Conference Board is quite right that the interests are not necessarily the same at different levels. Well, no, look, they're not different levels.
Okay, this has gone on longer than I thought, and my computer's crashed. So I think what I'll do is I'll break this up into two. So this will be part one, and I'll do part two.